Well, hello and welcome to the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast for HR managers and business owners, where we talk about workplace wellbeing to make everyone's lives better, including yours and mine. My name is Stephen Pink. I'm the CEO of Verve Healthcare, and my guest in this episode is Paul Johnson. Paul's career has seen him in NHS organisation development, talent management, recruitment and retention, and nursing leadership, building on his training as a mental health nurse and psychotherapist. He's now a senior facilitator at an organisation called A Kind Life, where he helps leaders excel at leading their teams. And I'm really interested that we're going to be talking with Paul to hear his insights on how good leaders show real kindness.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for inviting me today. And it's a really passion of mine to think about kindness and to think about staff and staff engagement. So, yeah, really good to be here.
Thanks, Paul. Paul, do you want to kick off? Tell us a little bit about your work, because it's a really interesting background you've got there.
Yeah, and it's I think I'm one of those people that I've just gone where my interests have taken me. I always say I don't know what I want to do when I grow up, but it's led me to be really curious. I think to be curious about people, and I guess that's my direct clinical experiences, to think about working with people who are in need and in distress, but then to think about some of the systems around people. So to think about the workforce, to think about workforce planning, to think about how organizations structure themselves, and how we can, as we grow in our leadership journey, how we can get the best through the teams that work with us. So it's still about patient care ultimately, but delivering it through other people. So I've moved about a bit, and I think at the moment, kindness is my mission, because I think the world has really changed from the pandemic. There's lots of distress that's going on, and I think that's well evidenced through research. So it's about how will we manage that? How can we be slightly kinder for ourselves? Because the evidence is that if we are slightly kinder to ourselves, we benefit from it. The individuals that we're kinder to benefits from it as well. So I'm really keen to think about kindness in the workplace at the moment.
That's really interesting. And I think some people watching the podcast think that's a bit of an odd sort of subject to be talking about. But how do you, when you think about kindness, how do you define it?
So I think there's two bits for me, and I think kindness has got a bit of a bad reputation, because I think when we hear of kindness, sometimes people hear about those that are just people pleasers, and those that take on too much and that end up really burning themselves out. And I don't think that that's what kindness is about. And if we go back to the origins of kindness, back when it was recreated, was really about kinship. It was about coming together. It was about making sure that as a community that you looked after those that were your kin, sharing stuff together and making sure that you approach things in a way that was that was as a group. It was a community. It wasn't about doing things individually. So I think the bit for me about kindness, it's twofold. It's about appreciation. It's about there's sparkly moments that you have at work. Everyone has them. And actually what we don't do sometimes is to say to someone, thanks, that really made a difference. We wait until people leave and say fantastic things on their cards, but we don't just stop and appreciate them. And I think the second bit is what we don't do is to just engage with people. As leaders, sometimes we're driven, we've got KPIs, we've got measures, and we don't take the staff team with us to say, what you've been doing is really great, but we now need to move it on, and it needs to look like slightly different. What are your ideas? So I think for me, the kindness movement is just about bringing everyone with you, showing a bit of appreciation, a bit of civility. I think we put things in emails that we wouldn't say face to face. So a bit of civility as well in terms of how to really engage with teams and to help bring everybody along, but recognizing that everyone's got their own issues that they're dealing with at the moment.
Thank you. I know what the next questions I want to ask you, and I'm kind of dreading it in case I learn something about me. But go on. What in your view, what's the characteristics of an organization or a leader that doesn't have a kind approach?
So there's a couple of bits, and I think this is well evidenced. So I think that you can look at this. So I think organizations that don't operate in a kind approach, I think you have high turnover. So I think people come to an organization, the culture gets really affected, and I think people see that and then they jump back out again. Don't know if you know that analogy of the frog and hot water.
Yeah.
Where if you put the frog in hot water, it'll jump out because it says it's really toxic. But if it tries to manage cold water and the heat goes up, it will die because it gets overwhelmed. So I think you'll see that lots of turnover for organizations. I think you'll also see a lack of trust. And again, it's well evidenced that actually high performing teams have trust as a fundamental aspect of how they function. But kindness fuels trust. So if you have an area that's full of trust, then what you get is you get people then saying, I know what the vision is, I know how we're working, I have a voice. So we can argue, but I trust that I'm going to have a voice. And then once I know I had a voice and we've made an agreement, it might not be my agreement. What I then do is I'm more productive and I'm more accountable because I know exactly what I'm doing. So I think that we know that when there's not trust, that actually there's a lot of things that don't go very well. And in healthcare, ultimately, it's the patient experience and our patient outcomes go down. We know that when there's not trust and when there's not kindness, you have higher mortality, your patient outcomes are reduced, and the patient experience is also reduced. So you get more complaints.
I guess you can kind of read that healthcare example across to other industries as well, where those industries will have their versions of that kind of negative outcome of a lack of kindness.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just health related, it's in the commercial sector too, it's in the social care sector, absolutely everywhere. If the kindness and the trust isn't there, then actually you start to see the failings. So the end user and we as consumers will go into, commercial organizations, and we'll know there's organizations where there's high levels of trust, and we'll also know when we go into the organizations where the staff don't feel looked after. Same for the travel industry. We know that and we can think of those brands. I won't mention them, but we can think of those brands where actually you think, oh, I think I know that someone who goes the extra mile and I feel looked after. And those where I go in and I know it's just really transactional.
I get that. Sometimes, especially if we're feeling frustrated, it can be tempting as a leader, or we don't even think about it, to be a bit snappy. And what can we do as leaders to keep that kind of that potential in check?
Yeah, and I guess for me, so it's an interesting one. There are pressures and there are demands, and I'm not saying that kindness trumps all of that stuff, but I have to think sometimes about my mindset, and I have to think about what's it like on the other side of me, when I'm leading. What happens when I'm in survival, and I just need to get the deadlines done, and I just need to work to the pace, and I just need to make sure that everything's organized. And what is it like when I'm actually thriving and I'm actually working alongside other people and being quite collaborative? You can't see it here, but on the wall behind me, I have my survival mindset that just reminds me sometimes to kind of just pause and think about, where am I? Am I in survival or am I thriving? Because the two are really polarized. And if I am in survival, sometimes I need to just stop and think, how can I move myself into thrive? Who can I collaborate with? What things need to happen in order to make sure that I'm not just pushing it further and further and further. I don't know about you, I feel like I'm less productive when I'm in that survival state, because I know I'm at threat. I know that I'm probably micromanaging. I know that I'm probably looking at too much detail, rather than being able to stop and pause and step back and say, okay, so what's the job that needs to be done? And what am I looking at that maybe doesn't need to be done so urgently?
I think that whole snappiness thing is a real trap that we can all fall into, isn't it? And I'm a great believer people come to work to do a good job. None of us intend to be snappy, but I really like what you said about having that almost that prompt just to take a breath in a moment and reflect on self and say, am I in survival or thrive mode? That's probably all you need to do, isn't it? And then react accordingly.
Absolutely. And you said something there, and I think that this has been one of the fundamental things that I believe. I think that our staff are fantastic. I think they just need to be in the right environment to really thrive and show how brilliant they are. And that's our job, I think, as leaders, to make sure that that environment is as good as possible. But I think that people come to work because actually most of them, and it's not everybody, but most people just want to do a good job, or they want to care, or they want to deliver a good service. They want to feel really proud about the work that they do. To my latest analogy, I've got quite a few. My latest analogy is sometimes, people complain about the traffic, and you can't complain about the traffic if you're in the traffic. So if you're in the car, you're part of it. So that's the bit about we all need to take ownership of this.
Yeah.
But we don't control the roads, so there's something about that as leaders, we have to kind of help shape the roads and help shape the infrastructure. But everyone's responsible for making sure that we work in really great teams and great places of work to be, I think.
So thinking about that a little bit more, I really appreciate what you said there. You've got a really clear background in recruitment and retention. And kind of in the context of kindness, what do you feel that potential employees are looking for when they're choosing a new place to work? Because we know there's a kind of real struggle to get talent sometimes, not enough of it we all need. What are potential employees looking for when they decide where to go?
I think it's definitely an employees market at the moment. I think that's what employers need to take uh, some great awareness of. Actually, we choose where to work, and we know that we need to work, but at the moment there's great opportunities across the board. I think the bit for me is about a level of, got to be a level of work-life balance and how I work and how I choose to work. I think that COVID has really changed that parameter of actually what do I want to get out of my work and my employment. It's got to be more than just money. That transactional stuff about I work and you pay me. There's got to be more about that sense of flexible working, how I'd like to work. There's got to be something about kindness and kinder cultures. So the work can be really, really difficult,
Mm.
really challenging, but actually I just need to feel like I'm valued a bit, and I feel like I've got the resources that I need, or I feel like I've got the team around me that I can stop and draw and pause breath, and that what I won't do is to feel criticized when I make a mistake, because we'll all make mistakes, and I think that's
Mm.
just the nature of what we do. Mistakes will happen, but actually I think there's something about, I'm really careful now about where I go to work and how stressed I see the environment, how stressed I see those that are around me, because that's the frog in the hot water. I need to
Mm.
be aware of the climate of where I work as well. And part of it's about my development, about how I'm going to grow and how I'm going to develop. But that's not always about training. I think sometimes we make a mistake thinking that people just want to be trained in the latest X, Y, or Z or the
Mm.
latest. And sometimes I don't think that is. I think it's about growth, development, exposure, shadowing people, coaching, mentoring. I think that development can take place in different ways. And likewise, as someone who's not quite at the end of my career yet, but I'm in that sort of ballpark. It's also about giving back, Steve. I kind of sit there and think I've got a lot to offer. I
Mm.
want to work for an organization that will say to me, how can we help you go ahead and mentor others? Because
Mm.
I've learned a lot, and there'll be other people that are just starting their careers. So what can I do to kind of like support them and hand that legacy on so that people can kind of like learn from some of my mistakes and some of my traps earlier on?
I think that's great. I know one of the things I say to the guys is that, I learn as much from you as the other way around. And if I think about, when I really enjoy my time at work, it's when we're working together on a really awful problem, some real challenge that no one knows the answer to. For me, some of those days, the most satisfying days, because you've kind of been in the sandpit together, pooling
Yeah.
your intelligence and working to a common goal. And if you're trying to do that, if you're not kind to each other in that environment, it doesn't work. You don't get the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of us, I think, are facing wicked problems. So we know that there have been problems that have been out there for a while that actually aren't so easy to sort out. If there are far more intelligent people than me. If they could sort them out, they would have done it already. They're really wicked, and we don't always have the answers, and there's a complexity around it. So you're absolutely right. We need to get into this together and not have people working isolated, but thinking about how do we really tackle them. But the kindness bit's the key, because it's about going back and revisiting things, and allowing people to ask the stupid questions and allowing people to just be really creative. And that might be a clunky process to get to where you need to be.
I've got a meeting coming up this afternoon, and you've just given me some tips for that. Thank you very much. Let's get a bit practical now for a sec. So, as managers, obviously, not all the time, not everything goes to plan. Sometimes we do have to tackle performance issues with people. That's the nature of being a leader. What tips can you give us, which will mean that when we have those difficult conversations, they can be kind conversations at the same time?
I think there's two things. I think difficult conversations are part of what leadership's all about. I think there is something. And I also think as well, and I think that this is one of the things that have guided my principles in all my leadership and management roles. I think it's also really unkind to watch people suffering and struggling.
Mm.
And my aim is to go in there to say, initially, how can I help? Something's not working here, and be
Mm.
really clear about what that is. How can I help? What do you need from me or from an organizational perspective? Because I don't want to see you struggling. That's
Mm.
the first bit. And then the two roads from there, that an individual either then joins me in that journey to say, you're absolutely right, what can we do? Or they say, it's not me, it's you, or they deflect it somewhere else. But then it's about just being really clear about the next steps. And, we all have our policies and procedures. So it's about them following them really, really carefully, but not shying away from difficult conversations. So my healthcare example, and I'll give the healthcare example, I always used to say, this isn't about you and me. Ultimately, it's not about you and me. Actually, it's about the delivery of patient care. And if I ignore that, then actually our patients get really bad outcomes and a really bad experience. So that's always been the bit that's allowed me to find my voice, because actually the delivery of what we're trying to do, you know, whether it is about customer service, if we don't address things, then that's what suffers. So no one wins in this whole round. And I think I take that from my standpoint as a manager then, in terms of what I then need to do to address that across the board. But they're not easy conversations to have, you know. And again, I think sometimes I don't apologize for not for not having to struggle with some of those conversations. They're not necessarily easy, but I do my preparation. So sometimes again I have to think about, I have to really step back and think, what's objectively happening here, and what bits are my frustration, because you might not be doing things in my way. So I get frustrated because I know how I might do it, but you have to allow people to do it in their own way. But being really clear about actually, how's that affecting the bottom line? How's that affecting the end? Be that the patient care, be that the customer service, be that, you know, the role in what it is that we're trying to do, you know. But also the kindness thing, again, saying to people, well, what's happening? So again, what's happening for you? Because it might be the case that, you know, you join the organization, you're absolutely thriving, but something's different now. Is everything okay back at home? What's happening? What can we do? Do you need to work differently? And that's the bit about getting people to join you. It might be something personal. It might be that they're bored. It might be that you know, that from a work perspective, actually it's just not thrilling anymore. Do we need to think about a different post? Do I have to, can I help you to coach you to your next job?
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay. I think sometimes it's not about getting people and hanging on to them to the nth degree. But I often say, and I've had some brilliant people that I've said, I need to launch you. I can't, it'd be wrong to keep you in the, you know, in the department. Let's get you working, and we'll launch you, and I'll see where you go. Remember me when you're hitting the dizzy heights.
That's really cool. And how do you, so it's really clear from this conversation that kindness in lots of dimensions is a really important aspect of good leadership. How does one go about building a kind organization?
Kinder cultures, and I guess that's a bit of where I am now with the kind life, because kinder cultures is really, really important. And I think for me, I think what you need to see in those kinder organizations is having spots whereby there is a sense of people coming together and sharing that stuff, sharing that expertise, by being really clear about, where are we going as an organization? What is it that we're trying to deliver? And what are people's views? How do we kind of like understand each other's roles in an organization? So I'm busy beavering away, but I know what I do and I know how it fits into the wider organization. But also that sense of value. So again, I'm really big. The other big passion that I've got at the moment is around supervision and reflective practice, and just being able to get people to stop and think about what they're doing in their roles, how it all comes together, and what their next set of objectives are. So really kind of like working with people so that everyone's really clear about what they do. To also just have a bit of fun as well and encourage those connections. It's, you know, so my organization doesn't have a base, so we're working at different people across the country. And, you know, every once in a while we just have a dial-up and I can just connect with someone and say, how's it going? What's happening? And feeling that we've got permission to do that, I think is really vital. You know, other organizations, again, healthcare, about making sure people have got access to tea and coffee, you know, and that people do take breaks.
Yeah.
Don't work excessive hours. We've got this thing and this mentality that if I just put more and more hours in, the more productive I can be. And actually, it's completely the opposite.
Can I ask you, it kind of is a little bit of a tangent, but you were talking about people taking breaks there and the importance of that. One of the things I struggle with is when people don't want to take their break. They want to say, no, I work through, I don't want to take a lunch and I don't want to stop for a coffee. And I sometimes find that I'm almost, bullying is the wrong word, but cajoling them into, have a break. And I find that really hard. But some people just don't want to. Well, how can we encourage people to be kind to themselves?
Absolutely. Well, the kindness model, absolutely. It's not about being kind to others, but by being kind to ourselves. There's a story. Bear with me while I just praise this story for you.
Okay.
It's the woodcutter story, and it's renowned in leadership, talking about the woodcutter story. So the woodcutter goes to work for somebody and really wants to do a great job and gets recruited to chop down some trees. And so he spends his time chopping down trees. And then the first day he chops down 18 trees, which is really great. The second day he chops down 16 and he says to his manager, I'm really sorry, I'll get back up to 18. The third day he chops down 14 trees. And then at the end of the week, he's down to 10 trees. And the manager comes to him and says, how's it going? And he says, I don't seem to be doing really well. I'm working harder. I'm putting in more hours. But the more I work, the less trees that I seem to be felling. And the manager says, but have you taken a break? And he says, no, because I've been trying to get more trees done. And he says, well, if you took a break, you might then sharpen your axe, which will then make you more productive.
Great story.
But there's something about just being able to slow down and just being able to really stop and think about, I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to refuel myself. I'm going to stand up and walk around and just ground myself back in what's happening in the building. Means that when you go back to your desk, you will be more productive. And I think that's the key bit for all of us. Sometimes we just need to switch off.
Yeah. I suppose it's a bit like the importance of taking holidays as well, isn't it? Same kind of thing.
It's exactly the same principle. And if we're not kind, especially at the moment, I went from being in a building and walking around and going from one meeting to another, and I spend a lot of time sitting down. And actually, I know at the end of the day, if I'm sitting down, I've become less productive because I'm distracted by a screen. I can only work and think in a certain way in a screen. I'm not as productive as being in a room with people. So there's absolutely a lot of evidence to say one of the things about kindness is being able to get up and walk around and move around and sit with the dog for 10 15 minutes, and he's quite grounding at the same time. I think that's absolutely vital stuff, and I think we should be doing more of it.
I'll definitely have a walk around when we finish this conversation. That's a good prompt. Sometimes, we talked a bit earlier on about how the characteristics, if you like, of kind and unkind workplaces. And some, you talked about the interaction with people. You think, that's not a very kind organization by the way the person is talking to you as a customer. Some companies do get a bit of a reputation for not being kind places. How can they come back from that? How can they kind of restore their kind reputation?
So I think the bit for me is, I would always go back to say, actually, what are we trying to achieve here? What are we trying to do, and how are we planning on doing it? So again, I'm quite big on values at the moment, because it's not about what you do, but sometimes it's also about how you do it. But also then refreshing that with your team so that they feel that they've got some choice and some opinions. Our staff who deliver the services or the sales in which we work in will have some great ideas and some opinions about the work and what the work looks like. And sometimes I think what we might need to do is to pause a bit and just say, look, we're just going to have a bit of a rethink. We recognize that maybe our reputation isn't where we want it to be. And I wonder what it's like for you. You work here. What do you say to your friends? If your friends were going to apply for a job here, what would you be saying to them? Would you be really encouraging people? Oh, yes, it's a great place to work, or I'd go down the road if I were you, because you've got a lot of data and a lot of information right in your staff team. And I think for me, if you really wanted to think about your wider reputation, your biggest advocates are your staff team. So actually, I'd go and have a conversation and just say what's working, what's not working.
And then presumably decide to address, make a conscious decision to address what you learn.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key bit. We do lots of consultation sometimes. We do lots of speaking to people, what's working, what's not working, and then we carry on doing exactly what we were doing before and wonder why things don't change. So I think the key bit for me is actually, then what's the next step? You're going to listen. That's absolutely right. But active listening means, well, then we'll learn on that. We've done this as a result of it.
Okay. We're coming towards the end of the podcast. You've worked in lots of different organizations, lots of different settings. Which types of wellness sort of solutions or wellbeing initiatives have really struck you as being effective in your kind of journey around different organizations?
So I guess some of the ones that I think have been more successful, and I'm going to separate them in a couple of ways. I think that I've worked in organizations where there's been wellbeing champions. So someone who's just been able to kind of like really think about wellbeing in the organization and to kind of get us together and take a lead on some of the things. So take a lead on whether it's about getting us some time out, or I've had people, getting benches for staff so that actually during the summer we can go out and we can have lunch outside.
That's
So
nice.
really think about what well-being could look like for different teams, and just making some real practical things. Some people have arranged bowling in the evening, so getting someone to lead on that seems to work really, really well. I think the other bit, and it goes back to the kindness, is those organizations that just create a space for people to get together to think about the work and the impact of the work on them as individuals. That supervision and that reflective practice, I think, is really, really key, because I think it's difficult if you that example again of working in an organization where it doesn't have a good reputation, customer service is really bad. They'll also have customers that are really being quite critical, and being able to stop and think about, actually, is it training, or what's it like if you know you're going to go into an organization or you're going to go to work and just be criticized constantly? It's not easy. So what can we do about that? So I think that reflective space, I think, is really important. I think that well-being focus is really important as well, but also that sense of just being a bit kinder to ourselves.
It sounds from what you're saying that kind of lack of kindness can also become like a sort of vicious circle going round and round. And as leaders, we need to find a way of trying to push it back the other way. And it
Yeah,
starts with small steps, I think, from what you're saying. Is that the right way to interpret it?
absolutely. And the work-life balance is a key one. So that badge of pride that we say, and I've been guilty of it, Steve, I did it fairly
Mm,
recently, of working like 50, 60 hours, trying to get it all done, and doing it with the right motivation. Because all I was
mm,
trying to say is, if I can catch up, then I'll be all right. I'll be all
yeah.
right for Monday. And I never caught up. I never caught up. And that was the reality of it. So the kind of stuff, I think, does start with us, that sense of, maybe I have to say, I can't achieve it all, or maybe I have to slow down, but also to say to people, you know, leave on time, leave on
Mm,
time, and don't have your work emails on your phone, and don't do things at the weekend if you can help it.
mm.
Because actually, we need to manage the structure, the infrastructure, and you can only come in and do what you do. So for me, it's the going back and speaking to staff and say, what's working well, but what would be even better if, and start addressing the even better if stuff, because there might be some really small wins that you can do that would make a difference.
Start to push it back the other way. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, your current role is relatively new for you, and you've worked in the NHS, various places, for a long time. What was it about your new employer that really appealed to you? I'm really interested to understand what attracted you to them.
I think timing was everything. I think that you, again, having had a nearly 40-year career in the NHS, and actually thinking about, actually, how will I take this forward when I finally do retire? What will I do? And I
Mm,
think the approach of kindness for me just said, how can I help people to really slow their thinking down? And how can I help people really think about what kindness means in the workplace? So I wanted to step outside and really think about kindness into action, just not about kindness as a concept, but kindness into action, and to think about how we slow spaces down for supervision and reflective practice and deliver back in healthcare. So again, we deliver in healthcare, we deliver in commercial services as well, but actually to go back in with this knowledge and with this
mm.
mindset to really then start to talk about it. But I think I wanted to slow my thinking down as well, and to be in an organization that did say to me, Paul, we don't work at weekends. Please don't send out loads of emails. We just don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And we want you to take a break. And we're really curious about what's going on. So again, I think I wanted an organization that had a similar mindset to where I am at the moment.
It's interesting. I remember we put in place a policy, believe it or not, that kind of made weekend emails something that was frowned upon, to push it right back the other way. And it's really hard because sometimes you slip into it and you have to apologize, and some people don't like it when you say, "Oh, why have you sent that email at the weekend?" It does make a difference. People's kind of demeanor and positivity about work has really changed as a result of that. Not always on, always available.
Yeah. And my kids used to come in and say to me, I don't want to work like you.
Yeah.
You're at the desk again. It's 8 o'clock. I don't want to work like you. And actually, you're going to make yourself unwell. And at some level, I had to listen to that. I say kids, they're adults, but their perspective was really, really helpful. What you're doing actually isn't really helpful. And what it meant was I couldn't do the other stuff that I needed to do, which sometimes was about being with them, being with other family members, taking care of, and then just just going out and taking photographs and walking and doing the stuff that I like to enjoy, because work was coming first. And again, it's incremental. It didn't happen immediately, but it happened that I worked a couple of hours extra in the night. Then it worked out that, I had to do something on a weekend. Then I ended up giving a day for the weekend to try and catch up. So it's incremental. That's how these things happen. So I think for me, it was about saying, I probably need to change this. Actually, I want to change it. I want to do it differently.
Interesting. Paul, we're coming to the end of our conversation. Before we go, have you got any sort of final or closing thoughts for the people that are watching and listening to this podcast?
I think the kindness movement starts with us. Actually, it starts with us as individuals. And I think there is something about, how do I demonstrate kindness? My example of working excess hours, what I soon realized was that my team were doing exactly the same thing.
Right.
And actually, even though I didn't email them at a weekend, and I was really careful not to do that, I could see that they were online at the weekend. I could see that on a Monday, when I did send out their emails, they would say to me, "You've been busy this weekend," because there's no way I would have sent out all those emails between 8 and 8:30. So I think the kindness movement, I think, really starts with us. I think when we get staff that feel really obstructive and defiant and not willing to toe the party line, sometimes I think it's important to step out of our shoes and to step into their shoes and just think about, where are you? Have you always been like that, or is something different? And I think, again, just being very quick, I'm just conscious that within teams, you will always have a mood hoover. You will always have someone who sucks the lifeblood out of the organization and doesn't want to give anything back. And when we get that, we pay it forward. We pay forward those behaviors. We pay forward that emotion to the next person that we come across, be that a customer or a patient. But you can also be a mood heater. So I'm conscious about, when I go into work, I want to be the mood heater. I want to be the person that actually people say, "Oh, Paul's here. This is really, really great." Because all that stuff is really infectious. I think we carry that stuff forward.
I think I'm definitely going to try and be a mood heater. I think that's the right way around more
Yeah,
of the time. Paul, it's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. It's been absolutely superb.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Steve.
Pleasure. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you for being part of the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast from Verve Healthcare. If you want to improve well-being in your workplace through structured access to mental health support, physiotherapy, GPs, or just have a chat about what you can do, we also offer services around managing personal finances, then we've got a solution for you. Why don't you get in touch? Visit us at vervehealthcare.co.uk and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Thank you.